somewhere inside your body right now. There's a message written 7,000 years ago. It was never carved into stone. It was never written on a scroll. It survives in something far more permanent than any monument humans have ever built: your DNA. And what that message reveals is one of the darkest secrets in human history. If you're a man, there's a strong chance that 95% of the men who lived alongside your distant ancestors never had children. Not because they chose not to, because something made sure they never got the chance. This isn't a theory from a history book. This came from genetics labs in the early 2000s, when scientists began mapping something called the Y-chromosome. The piece of DNA passed almost unchanged from father to son, generation after generation, stretching back tens of thousands of years. Unlike the rest of your genetic code, which mixes and reshuffles every generation, the Y chromosome works like a name passed down a bloodline. Trace it back far enough, and it tells you exactly which men fathered which sons, all the way into deep prehistory. Researchers expected to find a slow, steady family tree, thousands of separate male lineages, each one branching outward from a different ancient father, spreading across tens of thousands of years like the roots of an old tree. What they found instead broke every expectation they had. Around 7,000 years ago, the entire male family tree of humanity nearly collapsed. Where there should have been thousands of surviving lineages, the data showed something impossible. Only about 1 in every 17 men successfully passed his line on to the next generation. Some later studies suggest the number may be even more extreme than that. Now here's where it gets strange. When researchers checked the female side of the story, mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to child, they found nothing unusual. Women's genetic diversity during this same period stayed completely stable. No collapse, no missing branches, no mystery at all. Only the men were disappearing. Think about what that actually means. Whatever event caused this had to be selective. It had to specifically target men, while leaving women largely untouched. And once you start ruling out explanations, the list gets very short, very fast. A plague wouldn't do this. Disease doesn't check whether you're a man or a woman before it kills you. Famine wouldn't do this either. Starvation is brutally, mathematically equal in who it takes. Even a catastrophic natural disaster, a flood, a drought, a volcanic winter, has never been shown to wipe out male lineages while leaving female lineages completely intact. There's only one force in human history capable of producing this exact genetic fingerprint: organized, sustained, brutally selective violence between groups of men. A kind of violence where losing didn't just mean death. It meant your entire bloodline was erased from existence, while the women from your community were simply absorbed into the group that defeated you. For a long time, historians assumed the deep past was relatively peaceful. Small bands of hunter-gatherers spread thin across the land, without the population density or the resources needed to fight large, coordinated wars. War, most assumed, was something that came later, with kings, with empires, with armies. But evidence had already started emerging from sites scattered across the ancient world, showing that organized, brutal violence between human groups went back much further than anyone expected. The clearest evidence lines up almost perfectly with this exact window in time. In what is now Germany, archaeologists uncovered a pit at a site called Schöneck-Kilienstaden, dating to roughly 7,000 years ago, the same period the genetic bottleneck points to. Inside, the remains of at least 26 people, including infants and children, all showing signs of brutal violence. Skulls smashed, legs deliberately broken, possibly to prevent escape before death. And almost no adult women were found among the remains. Researchers studying the site concluded that the women of that community were likely taken, not killed, exactly the pattern the genetic data predicts. Across parts of Europe, mass graves from this same broad period tell a similar story again and again. Entire settlements uncovered with skeletal remains showing clear signs of violent death. Skulls fractured by blunt weapons. Bodies thrown carelessly into pits instead of buried with any ritual or care, the way a community usually treats its own dead. In several of these sites, researchers noticed the same unsettling detail: a disproportionate number of adult male remains, while women and children from the same community were conspicuously missing from the graves altogether. Put the genetics and the archaeology side by side, and they start telling the same story from two completely different directions. One from inside our cells, one from underneath the ground. So what actually caused this? The leading explanation ties back to one of the biggest shifts in human history: the rise of agriculture. For the first time, humans weren't just moving across open land, hunting and gathering whatever they could find. They were settling down, claiming specific pieces of land as their own, accumulating things that could be inherited: grain stores, livestock, tools, territory. And the moment inheritance enters the picture, so does competition over who gets to inherit it. Anthropologists believe human societies during this period increasingly organized themselves around patrilineal clans, tightly bonded groups of related men who fought as a unit to defend or expand territory and resources for their bloodline. When one clan defeated another, the victors didn't just take the land. In many cases, the evidence suggests they eliminated the losing clan's men almost entirely, removing any future challenge to their claim, while absorbing the defeated group's women into their own. There's actually a much more recent, much better documented example of this exact same pattern happening on a smaller scale that helps make it easier to understand. Genetic studies have identified a single Y-chromosome lineage carried by an enormous number of men across Central Asia today, tens of millions of them. Researchers traced its origin to roughly 800 years ago, right around the time of the Mongol conquests, and many believe this lineage traces back to Genghis Khan and his close male relatives. One man and his sons spreading a single bloodline across an entire continent, while the bloodlines of the people they conquered were pushed toward extinction. If a single empire 800 years ago could leave a genetic footprint that massive, imagine what thousands of smaller, forgotten conflicts, playing out over centuries, could do to the entire species. Now repeat that pattern, not once, not in one region, but across dozens of generations in different pockets of the ancient world over hundreds of years. Do that, and you get exactly the genetic fingerprint researchers uncovered thousands of years later. Female lineages surviving in huge diversity because women kept being absorbed into whichever clan won. Male lineages getting pruned down generation after generation until only the bloodlines of the victors remained. It likely wasn't one war. It was probably thousands of smaller, brutal conflicts playing out across different regions over centuries. The accumulated result of humanity's first real experiment with property, inheritance, and organized violence between rival kin groups. And here's the part that should genuinely sit with you for a moment. If you're a man and your ancestry traces back through this period, statistically, you're very likely descended from one of the winners. Not necessarily the strongest man, not necessarily the smartest. Just someone whose clan happened to come out on top of a war so effective at erasing rival bloodlines that its impact is still detectable in human DNA 7,000 years later. This isn't ancient history the way we usually picture it. A war we can name, with kings we can look up, with treaties and monuments and battle sites marked on a map for tourists to visit. This is a war with no name, no recorded armies, no individual battles anyone wrote down, just a pattern buried inside the genetic code of billions of people that took modern science thousands of years to even notice was there at all. Historians and geneticists are still arguing about what this really means. Some believe this bottleneck marks the true beginning of large-scale, organized human warfare, the moment our species crossed a line it never fully came back from. Others believe it reflects something even more unsettling: that the very foundations we usually credit with building civilization, farming, property, permanent settlements, may have simultaneously unleashed one of the most brutal periods of violence our species has ever lived through. There's even a darker layer to this that most people never consider. If entire bloodlines of men were being erased generation after generation, that means countless human stories simply stopped. Fathers whose sons never grew up to have sons of their own. Entire family lines that existed for thousands of years before this period, gone completely, as if they were deleted from the record of who we are. We don't get to know their names. We don't get to know what they built, what they believed, what they were afraid of. All we get is their absence, measured statistically in the gap where their descendants should be standing today. We will probably never know how many separate wars contributed to this. We don't know the names of the clans. We don't know the names of the men who won, or the men whose entire bloodlines were wiped from history in a single generation. The genetic record shows us the outcome with startling clarity. The human stories behind it, the fear, the loss, the individual lives, are gone completely, as if they never happened at all. What's left is the signature, quietly written into the Y-chromosome of billions of men walking around today, most of whom have no idea it's there. So the next time someone tells you that early humans lived in simple, peaceful harmony with each other before civilization supposedly ruined everything, remember this. The deepest, most permanent record we have of the ancient world isn't sitting in a museum somewhere behind glass. It's inside you, right now, in every cell of your body. And it's telling you that 7,000 years ago, being born a man may have come with odds that almost nobody would survive. Which raises a question nobody has been able to answer. If this happened once, quietly, without leaving behind a single name or a single monument, hidden well enough that it took us until the 21st century to even notice it happened at all, how many other wars like this one are still sitting there, buried inside us, waiting for someone to finally go looking?